talk about the existence of dolphins in the heavily humanised, if that's the right word for it, Port River environment. And you can see how in the photo the dolphins are dwarfed by the human activity there. I've been out studying them now for quite a long time, just using very basic equipment, very unsophisticated technology, a camera and a piece of paper and a pen. But even with that simple equipment, you can get to know some pretty interesting stuff. Back in 1988, when I started this, the Port River was really just a drain, and I have it on good authority that the head of the EPA about then, when asked about the Port River, said, when asked about trying to reduce pollution in the Port River, said, "What's the point? It's just an industrial drain." And despite that attitude, and despite what we'd done to it, somehow or other, there were a few dolphins that continued to use that area and to survive there. Dolphins, in sort of popular perception, are these creatures of clean, green, pristine nature. Nothing could have been further from the truth for these guys. Apart from the environmental difficulties that they had with respect to surviving in a polluted and ecologically damaged environment, there were also attacks from people and other impacts on them from speeding boats and so forth. But these shootings and spearings and stabbings and so forth that happened were beneficial in one sense. A number of dolphins died or were injured by them, but it did turn the corner in the attempts that a lot of us were making to try and get better protection for the dolphins in the Port River. And that was really the trigger that led to the establishment of the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary. So the dolphins became a symbol of the Port River, and I think many of the improvements that we were able to get was by effectively emotionally blackmailing either the government or industry or both, or the community at large, into saying, how could you possibly allow this to happen? There are dolphins there. And I have to admit I was prepared to use that kind of emotional blackmail. The EPA gradually increased the restrictions on the pollution that was put in the river by a number of industries, and I think that was a very important step. And similarly, there was a lot of pressure on SA Water to reduce the amount of sewage effluent that they were putting into the system. The sewage discharges have reduced a lot. I can remember when I first started researching out there, there were these huge swathes of mud bank that were literally verdant green. It looked like a golf course at low tide because of all the sea lettuce that was just covering entirely all of these mud flats. And now when you go out at sort of this time of the year, late summer, early autumn, when that was at its peak, you hardly see any green at all. It's been a really dramatic change. No golf courses out there now. The area called Garden Island, which is in the heart of the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary currently, was the main dump site for both domestic and industrial waste for about half of Adelaide. And you can see in that photo how the waste was piling up right up to the high tide level. And the leaching which would have occurred and the blowing away of plastic and so forth, and the runoff from the exposed landfill, God knows what impact that had on the animals and on the ecosystem. But that's now been closed, and it's now a very well used recreational site. The wetlands that Tony spoke about in terms of providing important bird habitat are still and were probably mainly constructed to clean up the stormwater, which puts a lot of diffuse pollution from diffuse sources into the marine environment. And as a general rule of thumb, the wetlands take out about 50% of the pollutants that enter them. So they've been really important, apart from their value to the birds. In fact, some people think that they are getting too important and they're becoming recreational areas for people to go and watch birds or just generally enjoy nature. And there's quite a lot of pressure if there's been a spill or something to not let it into the stormwater system, because the stormwater systems are too precious to pollute now, which is a little bit of a problem. There are two main approaches to marine conservation. There's the one that we've been hearing about a lot in the earlier session of having marine protected areas, and particularly parts of those that we call sanctuary zones, where nothing's allowed to be touched. They're zero-take environments, and they're really, really important, and I've been a passionate advocate of those since the 1970s. The other kind is where the protected area is, or the conservation area, is one in which humans are seen to be part of. And I think that these are really, really important as well. As much as I appreciate and understand the necessity and importance of excluding humans from some areas, or human impacts, those will necessarily always be a tiny part of our marine environment. And I think we have to learn to live in collaboration with the marine environment much better than we do. And I think these cohabitation type protected areas are a way to do that, and that's what the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary has become. It wasn't an area that nothing was happening in. It would be impossible when that was established to suddenly kick out all of the human activities that were happening. We couldn't get rid of the industry. We couldn't get use of the shipping. We couldn't eliminate the human recreational uses in sailing and boating and fishing and so forth. So somehow or other, we humans have had to try and learn to live in some kind of harmony with the environment there that the dolphins share. The objectives then of the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary are to protect both the dolphins and their habitat, and importantly, it's got a habitat, it's got a management plan, and it's also very importantly got staff which are dedicated to the objectives of the sanctuary and dedicated in their attitude to that as well. And we heard earlier, I can't remember who it was now, talking about compliance, David, I think, and talking about the two kinds. And in the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary, that it's very much the soft compliance which is being pushed. It's education, trying to encourage people to do the right thing rather than hitting them over the head. And you can see here the rangers giving out some information to a kayaker who was maybe hassling dolphins. And that seems to be a system working really well. Despite it being a sanctuary, it's a place that lots and lots of people go to and use, and we still have threats. The feeding of dolphins, as we've just heard about, is a big issue and does have a lot of negative consequences, so we've been trying to stop that. There's a very high infant mortality rate for reasons that are still unclear. We have invasive species like the Caulerpa taxifolia, you can see in the bottom left. And there are lots of speeding boats which can potentially collide with dolphins. So it's by no means an easy ride for them out there, but it still is much, much better in terms of habitat than it was. These things like feeding and boat strikes are nasty, but in essence they impact just one or two animals if they hit them, whereas if you destroy the habitat, you in fact impact on all of the animals that use it. So the research that I've been doing going out in my boat over the years has been to part of it's been just counting the dolphins, noting where I see them, and keeping that as a record over time. And in let's just use this. I have a circuit that I use to go out, and I simply count all of the dolphins I see on this preordained circuit. And then I broke the habitat down into two areas. Those areas which are, just for a change, we'll come over this one, the darker bluey-grey areas, I have labelled the inner sanctuary, and that's the areas which receive the most human impacts, and the paler blue areas receive lesser impacts. Of course, there are no hard edges in the marine environment, and everything bleeds into everything else. And that's obviously the case with water quality as well, with the movement of the tides. But nevertheless, I just thought it might be a convenient way of trying to see whether the reduction in the amount of pollution that's been entering the system over time was having an impact on the dolphin numbers that were cited. All right, we'll give that one a miss. So the dolphins that were cited in the inner and most polluted part of the estuary, stop that, were the top line, and you can see there's been a trend going upwards over time since 1990, whereas the dolphin numbers that were in the outer area, the less polluted area, have remained relatively constant. You might be wondering why there were more dolphins in the polluted area than in the less polluted area, and that's simply an artefact of the research. There's a lot more water that I surveyed in the inner parts than the outer parts, and I didn't try to correct for the observer effort in the two different areas. So in essence, the number of dolphins has increased in the area that has been most impacted by humans over the years, since those impacts have been reduced significantly. So the crux of this then is that if you protect a charismatic species, like dolphins, it can lead to protection of the ecosystem. Well, it has to lead to protection of the ecosystem, because you can't protect a charismatic species, or any species for that matter, without protecting its ecosystem. So that's a benefit of highlighting the existence and desirability of protecting a charismatic species. If you protect the ecosystem, that has also positive effects on the overall economic value of that whole system, so that it's likely to be better for fishing, just generally have better ecosystem services, as the jargon puts it, for the whole system. And then, hopefully, and this is the crux point, that should feed back into providing better protection for the charismatic species originally. But that dark line is really, the dark red line, is the problem, because despite out at the Port Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary, despite lots of economic value coming from that in the terms of tourism, there are probably, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars are made from those dolphins, there's nothing that I can see that actually goes back into protecting the animals that they are deriving their benefit from. And I think it's really important that the government finds a way to, whether it's levying tourist operators or finding some way of actually getting that money back into doing the things that it's meant to do. Just some acknowledgements, and thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. It's time for one question. I'm not going to take the mic up there, Tim.
Look, wonderful talk, and congratulations on what you've done. I suppose I've got two questions. How many dolphins are in that area? Because I saw the numbers on your graphs are pretty small. And what specifically are you looking for funding to do for the dolphins?
To answer the second one first, because that's the more important one, there's continual pressure on the services being provided by the staff of the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary. The numbers were originally 3 full-time staff, and then down to less than 1.5, as I understand it. And I think the government needs to be maintaining the support of those staff to try and maximise the benefits out there, both to protect them animals, but also to maximise the economic value in terms of tourism and so forth. In terms of numbers, it's difficult because it's not just a closed community there. There are some dolphins that spend almost all of their time there, others that come and go, might see them once every month, others I see once a year, others I see once every 10 years. So it's a kind of a complex system. But on any one day in the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary, my guess is there's probably about